Welcome to This Explainer. Look, it's a story we all think we know, right? An unlucky ship, a giant block of ice. But the actual truth about the Titanic is so much more chilling than that. Today, we're unpacking a catastrophic, compounding chain of human overconfidence and some pretty shocking systemic design flaws. So let's just place ourselves right there on the deck for a second. Imagine feeling that crisp Atlantic wind, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and literally unmatched luxury. On the night of April 14, 1912, the people aboard were blissfully unaware that in just hours, history would be made. Honestly, it was a dream realized, an absolute marvel of modern engineering that absolutely nobody believed could fail. Part 1. The Unsinkable Dream. To really wrap our heads around this tragedy, we've got to look at the massive industrial ambition brewing over in Belfast. See, the White Star Line was locked in this fierce corporate arms race with their rival, the Cunard Line. Cunard had just launched these two absolute giants, the Mauretania and the Lusitania, and they were winning the transatlantic race purely on speed. Recognizing they couldn't outpace them, White Star completely pivoted. They decided, hey, we're going to compete on unmatched elegance and just overwhelming scale. They essentially wanted to build a massive floating palace, pushing every boundary to create the largest passenger ship ever built. So, built by the massive shipyard Harland and Wolff, the ship featured this heavily publicized safety feature, 16 watertight compartments. But here is the fatal flaw that bred all that hubris. The bulkheads separating these compartments, they didn't go all the way up to the ceiling. The builders assumed maybe one or two compartments might flood in a worst-case scenario, but they literally never imagined a situation where the ship would tip forward, causing water to spill over the tops from one compartment to the next, kind of like an overfilled ice cube tray. That single unbelievable design blind spot created a deadly illusion of invincibility.
Part 2. Ambition and Fatal Flaws.
Right, so behind all those grand staircases and the fine dining, some fatal compromises were being made at the very top. J. Bruce Ismay, the managing director of the White Star Line, had this vision of a ship that would completely redefine luxury travel. Now, the original design actually allowed for up to 64 lifeboats, which would have been plenty. But to make sure the first-class decks stayed uncluttered and aesthetically pleasing for leisurely strolls, Ismay fundamentally prioritized elegance over adequate lifeboat capacity. He actually slashed the final number down to just 20. And the crazy part is, this hubris went all the way up to the command level. Captain Edward Smith was known as the millionaire's captain. We're talking about a guy with over 40 years of maritime experience. This maiden voyage was supposed to be his glorious final trip before a well-deserved retirement. But driven by this intense pressure to make the voyage a record-breaking spectacle and get to New York ahead of schedule, he made a highly controversial call. He chose to maintain speed through known ice-laden waters, flat-out prioritizing speed over caution. Part 3. The Fateful Collision. 22 knots. As the Titanic sailed across the open Atlantic on the evening of April 14th, multiple explicit warnings came in over the wireless from other ships. They were warning about massive ice fields ahead. Some even strongly suggested the Titanic should stop entirely for the night. Yet despite essentially flying blind on a pitch-black, moonless night with a glassy, calm ocean, the Titanic stubbornly maintained that dangerous speed of 22 knots. I mean, that was nearly its top speed. That entire evening became an absolute ticking clock of dramatic irony. While the first-class passengers waltzed and dined, totally oblivious, the lookouts up in the crow's nest were just squinting into the freezing dark, and shockingly, they didn't even have binoculars. The officer who held the key to the binocular locker had actually been reassigned right before departure in Southampton, and he accidentally left the ship with the key still in his pocket. Just think about that. This combination of fate, human error, and extreme speed left them relying entirely on the naked eye until it was simply too late. Then, at 11:40 p.m., the fatal impact occurred. But it wasn't a head-on crash. Because of the immense speed and the angle of the ship, the iceberg violently scraped along the starboard side. It buckled the hull plates and popped rivets over a massive 300-foot stretch. This instantly breached 5 compartments simultaneously. And remember, the ship was only designed to stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded. In mere moments, that devastating chain reaction was triggered, and the whole unsinkable myth was shattered completely.
Part 4. Chaos and Survival.
So the initial confusion quickly turned to panic, revealing just a brutal matter of arithmetic. There were 2,224 people aboard, but the total lifeboat capacity was only for 1,178. And the really shocking truth, this horrific shortage was actually completely legal at the time. Outdated maritime laws written by the Board of Trade based lifeboat requirements on a ship's tonnage, not its passenger capacity. Those laws were written for ships of 10,000 tons. They simply hadn't caught up to a 46,000-ton behemoth like the Titanic. Adding to the sheer terror was a complete lack of emergency preparation. Believe it or not, there had been no passenger lifeboat drill. Because of this profound confusion, the first lifeboats were actually launched half empty. Furthermore, the strict women and children first policy was interpreted totally differently depending on which side of the ship you were on. One officer took it to mean women and children first, letting men in if there was room. But another took it as women and children only, turning men away even when there were empty seats. It just resulted in this heartbreaking reality where families were permanently torn apart on the tilting decks. And as the ship listed further, a brutal class divide emerged. First-class passengers were located close to the boat deck, so they enjoyed rapid access to safety. But deep down in the bowels of the ship, third-class passengers had to navigate this terrifying, flooding maze of corridors. In many cases, physical, locked gates prevented them from ever reaching the top decks until it was way too late. Ironically, those gates were actually required by U.S. immigration laws to prevent the spread of infectious diseases. Just a tragic, tragic detail. Part 5. A world changed forever. When the nearby ship, the Carpathia, finally arrived 2 hours later to pull the traumatized survivors from the freezing ocean, the full, chilling scope of the disaster became undeniable. Over 1,500 people perished in the Atlantic waters. Less than a third of everyone aboard survived. It was a staggering, unimaginable loss of life that dominated headlines, shocked the entire globe, and demanded immediate answers to how the greatest ship in the world could just vanish on its very first voyage. But this immense loss did force sweeping global changes. High-profile inquiries in the US and the UK completely overhauled maritime law. This led directly to the creation of the International Ice Patrol, which, by the way, still monitors the North Atlantic today. Crucially, it birthed the first international convention for the safety of life at sea. They implemented strict new regulations, ensuring that every single ship must carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board, and they mandated 24-hour radio watches. Rules that continue to protect travelers right now. So the Titanic isn't just a shipwreck. It's a profound, enduring reminder of human limits. As we continue to push the boundaries of innovation, building massive, complex, so-called unsinkable marvels in our own modern, tech-driven world, we really have to ask ourselves, are we ensuring we don't repeat this fatal hubris? Are we still allowing our ambition to blind us to the uncompromising forces of nature? It's absolutely a question worth asking every single time we think we've finally conquered the impossible.